So this meeting is being recorded, and that ensures that all the questions that are asked and all the answers that are provided are able to be shared with everybody else. So we'll post a recording of this meeting on the the posting for the RFQ so that anybody else that wants to go back and look at this is able to. I did also just want to call out that the deadline for questions is tomorrow at 5 p.m. So if I'm not able to answer anything for you all today, that deadline for submitting any other final questions to Kimberly Banner will be available through tomorrow at 5. I did want to share that this is going to be kind of an unstructured question and answer opportunity. I don't have a presentation prepared, but I did just want to, at a high level, I'm happy to go through any exhibits. I'm happy to go through the property list kind of from my perspective and show you how I hoped that folks would go through the procurement. I know that often, I don't know, my intent may be different than the way that you all are reviewing. So happy to kind of give you an idea of what I was thinking. And then again, just reiterate that really the process from this RFQ, the process is expected to come out hopefully with a short list of pre-qualified candidates that would move forward with a local government entity on citing and designing a new or expanded program. So there will not be a contract that comes out of this specific RFQ process yet at this time. And with that, I will open it up to any questions that folks have, and we can just kind of go round robin. If everybody comes in at once, I might ask for like a raise hand feature or call out in the chat, but so far, I'm happy to just take questions as they come in.
Oh, well, I can ask one.
Sounds great.
I've got a number of them, Chris. But the exhibit B list that came out was different, and with regard to several properties than the list of eligible properties that was submitted to the CHRO board or to COCIC back in December. And in particular, the city of Bend had two 1.9 acre sites listed at the end of Hunter's Lane and another at the end of 18th Street that was part of a 500-acre tract, but it said more or less 235 acres or something like that. Those are no longer on the list of eligible properties that is part of Exhibit B. Do those remain as eligible property, or what is the rationale behind pulling those back and now they've got 4 little teeny tiny properties listed that are kind of like a sidewalk type area along the south side of Cooley Road. What about that?
I cannot speak to the rationale behind why those properties were removed, but I can say that you're spot on. There was a list of properties that was proposed to the CHRO board back, I think, in December. And that list of properties does differ slightly than what was ultimately published, given a request from the city of Bend to remove those properties in question from the list of properties being considered. So please do not, I mean, you're welcome to submit a proposal that includes those properties, but they were asked to be removed by the city. So I would expect that they're unwilling to move forward with projects in those locations at this time.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. There's a question also concerning funding. There's the 1.5 million that has been set aside by the county, which may or may not include city money. I'm not sure of that, but what other funds are going to be available beyond that 1.5 million that service providers might expect perhaps to see made possible to make this happen?
That's a great question, Chuck. I can't speak to the exact dollar amounts that'll be committed at this point. I think, candidly, a little bit of it depends on what's proposed as to what local governments might have funding to support. I can tell you that so far, you're correct that Deschutes County has allocated some resources to this process. The state of Oregon has allocated some resources as well. And then the cities of Bend and Redmond have both committed resources to this process. The exact dollar amount is undecided. And so we felt that in putting out the solicitation, it would probably be more harmful than helpful to explain that. And we're more so looking for providers to tell us, to tell local governments kind of what they think is an appropriate program to put where, and a realistic assessment of how much offering a program would cost. There's more money coming from the state through Executive Order 2402, and it's unclear exactly what all the rules and restrictions around that funding are going to be. And so acknowledging that our funding picture is a little murky, that's why we designed this process to be a little more high level at the initial outset, to focus on experience, public engagement commitments, some high level ideas, so that we can take a sense of what providers want to offer, what resources we have available as a community, from the state, from other partners, and then we can see if we can make something work.
So
kind of going up on that question is if there's going to be state funding, I think a big question that I would love to have answered is, would there be restrictions because the cost changes significantly for high barrier and low barrier? And some of that state funding that I've seen is it's for low barrier.
I would say right now, in attachment C, we list the types of projects that have support from entities participating in this process. And you'll see in Exhibit C, I can share my screen. And I'm just on the version of this that's posted on the COIC website, just for consistency's sake. You'll see that we look at safe parking, we look at supported sanctioned camping, we look at managed camping low barrier, we look at managed camp high barrier, and we look at pallet camp housing, or like kind of tiny homes. So as far as, are you guys able to see my screen okay? I guess I didn't ask. Yeah,
Yes.
okay.
Yeah.
So as far as that goes, like, we don't have specifications right now on whether or not a project would have to be high or low barrier. I think that's ultimately kind of a conversation for the next step in the process, when we get a little bit more towards the RFP, about what funding is available, kind of what do some of these public partners really want to see in their community. But I think at the outset, I wouldn't, if you have strong preferences on how you'd want to run a program, I think that's fantastic. But I wouldn't get worried about, whether or not funding would necessitate high or low barrier yet at this point. We are not aware of all the strings that are attached to all the different money yet. And so that'll definitely be a conversation to be had. But as far as this process goes, like when we were asking public entities to commit funding to the process, there were a whole heck of a lot of questions about, well, what are we setting aside funding for? And so this is an attempt at providing some options and to local government officials, so that they can get a better sense of what providers are thinking about as areas for opportunity. And then we can have a little bit more, I think, of a realistic conversation about funding needs, the way a program would operate, things like that. Is that helpful?
Somewhat, yes.
Okay, yeah, if I can follow up on that, the way I understand it is, in this, we can define our program basically, and they can choose whether they want to agree with that or not, right?
Yes.
Yeah, and there's no ask for a dollar amount in this round, right?
A high level budget would be helpful. Let me look. I do believe that there is some reference in
Yeah.
the solicitation to like a high level budget. Information would be helpful, but we don't want you to spend the time to break out a full project budget because we, in the off chance like your project doesn't move forward in the process, we don't want you to have spent all the time designing a budget and all of that for no reason.
Okay.
So on page, I'm going to just share my screen. On the bottom of page 10 in the solicitation, we ask for high-level cost estimates for developments and operations, as well as the number of clients served. And that is really helpful, I think, for public partners to kind of get a sense of, this is how many people per year, things like that. So it doesn't have to be granular, but the more information you can provide, the better.
Yeah, and I think you were clear on my next question, but I have a board member that insists I ask it. I mean, until the next phase of this process happens and a contract is negotiated, a service provider hasn't committed to making any of this happen, right?
Absolutely. Yep.
Thank you.
You bet.
I'm sorry, Leslie.
Leslie, go ahead.
Chris, what exactly do you mean by a high level budget estimate?
That's a great question. I think as specific as you can be on the total costs. I don't have that's a great question, Leslie. As much information as you can give us without spending a ton of time developing a really detailed budget. So I think some pieces of information that would be helpful for decision makers would be like a total site design cost or something like that. Like say you want to build tiny home shelters on a piece of property and maybe it needs some landscaping work. So maybe we estimate X number of dollars for landscaping. We estimate that the tiny homes might maybe cost $50,000 a unit, something like that. If you have a sense of like what a annual cost to operate a program would be, that's great. I think more detail would help you, but we're not looking for a line item, broken out budget, things like that. I think like
And cost estimates, like our cost estimates, or I mean, if you're talking about site development, you have all sorts of contractors. So the timeline to get contractors out to bid jobs, I don't think the time frame works for that.
No, I don't think we need that level of detail, Nikki. Like, I don't think you need to be like, we reached out to this contractor and they quoted us this much to develop this. I think you could say, based on past experience, we've seen that a development of this type has costed this much money. We think we'll be somewhere within that is helpful. I think what we don't want is no cost estimate, a local government to feel like, oh, this is an awesome proposal, we want to move forward, and then it's like, oh, it's going to be $20 million. Like, that's, I think, a little bit of a non-starter, but I don't think that the amount that you put in this response, you will necessarily, I think if the numbers change as programs get more developed, that's okay. It's just helpful as like a starting point.
And do you know if any of the city properties has the city committed to waiving the site development
SDCs
charges, CDCs?
That is a great question. I think it's still too early in the process for local governments to make commitments on like what they're willing to do or not do on certain projects. But I will tell you that in initial conversations, as I was asking local government entities, what are some non-monetary that aren't just like a subsidy, that, you know, that isn't just like the city of Bend gives Central Oregon Villages $100,000 to help. And so they're aware, local government partners are very much aware that providers are interested in other types of support, like fee waivers, like getting infrastructure put into sites if the cities or county would be willing to do that. I heard a question about whether or not, and this was, I mean, before the procurement, but like questions about whether or not local government entities would be willing to write in providers under their own insurance to help mitigate costs, things like that. So I think that at this point, everything is still open. And so if there are things like that, like SDC waivers, or, you know, getting sewer lines or power put into a property before development or a developer comes in, if those are necessary to your plan, it's good to include. If you don't know right now exactly what all you'd need, it's also okay to call that out, that you would need some like non-tangible benefits, and that we can talk more about that like in future negotiations, if that makes sense. Is
Yeah.
that clear? Does that make enough sense? I know I'm being
Yeah.
vague. I have to be, but yeah, okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
The go ahead.
Chuck, go ahead.
The 1,500 or the 1.5 is the county is providing, is that unrestricted in the sense that it could be spent on city land, or like in Redmond if it were on city land, or in Bend if it were on city land, or is that 1.5 restricted to locations within the county?
Great question. So so first off, the 1.5 million that the county set aside is ARPA funding. So any you know, uses of that money would have to follow those restrictions that come with the federal requirements. So just wanted to call that out. It's hard for me to say right now, because I think there's a lot of different possibilities, right? We could get one proposal, and if that were the case, like I can't speak on behalf of the county, although I'm a county employee. So I think that what I've heard from Deschutes County is that they're willing to partner with the cities of Bend and Redmond and ODOT, who have all offered up properties. And well, I guess the city of Redmond didn't technically offer up their own property, but yeah, I think the county is, from my understanding, willing to partner on projects that are developed inside Bend or Redmond city limits. I think they also reserve the right to fund their own project if there was something on county land that were submitted. You know, the goal of the CHRO is to get local government entities to work together and collaborate on homelessness more. So it would be not an ideal situation necessarily if we did this whole procurement and then each entity did their own, but it is a possibility. Does that answer your question, Chuck? I know I'm being vague.
Yeah, like Nikki said, somewhat.
If
Yeah,
there's anything like you need more clarity on, feel free to ask and I'll answer as much as I can. But if there's anything you think I'm missing.
I did have a question also on the ODOT land. How realistic is it for us to think that ODOT would just make free and openly available any of these tracks that they've identified here?
So that's a great question. And I got to make sure this is in here. So I'm going to share my screen again. I'm at the top of page 12, looking at Exhibit B. There's this hyperlink right here that I put up top that is supposed to make it easier. I don't know if it does, but it's supposed to make it easier for folks to review these properties in more detail. And within this properties list, once it loads, there's another list. So I would understand if you hadn't found it, but for the state of Oregon properties here, they included, we don't have the memo.
Yeah.
So you'll see these current statuses listed up here. Anything that is, I don't think that these properties would be free, to answer your question. I think that it's possible that through this process we could, with public partners, go to the state of Oregon and request it be donated. I think that many of these properties are still, like, you know, parts of freeway projects or whatever, and would need to go into negotiations. And then you'll also, no, actually, yeah, okay, so there's only these ones. That's great.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I don't think that we should expect at this time that it would be donated completely free. I think some of the properties are probably more favorable for ODOT to get rid of than others. But if you identified a property from the state of Oregon, then, you know, the CHRO, COIC, and other public partners would work with, you know, the entity submitting the proposal and ODOT to figure out kind of what's possible.
Right, that, like that, well, the first two listed there are in a completely different city. You know, they're not Central Oregon, but for that triangular piece of property over there by the railroad tracks, there's people that camp there already. And, you know, I would wonder about taking advantage of that land. And then there's another like Chiloquin property, but within and Klamath Falls, but of those that are in the Bend area, you know, they're all in that Murphy Road location, and there's a pretty good track that's west of the highway, of the parkway, that look like it might be I think it's the yeah,
The one in blue.
no, the one below it.
Oh.
17.41 acres. And that's the one that's along Murphy and yeah, it's in that Murphy and Parkway area alongside that. But
And I believe that one's a surplus property, it looks like, has been approved for disposition and is being marketed for sale.
right,
So yeah, that would be, I think we're close to potential sale about that. And then I do believe that this blue column is a tier 1, has been identified as like a priority property.
yeah, I've printed that off. I'll have to take another look at it and see about it. It seems like there were some access issues with it, but I'll take another look at that.
Sounds great. James, go ahead.
Yeah, I had a question about the county money, that ARPA funds that would need to be expended in 2024, correct? Is my understanding that that was the deadline for the ARPA funding?
I will have to get back to you on the specific deadline.
Okay, so that
I don't
that
want to
then
give that info.
that then leads to my next question was, I mean, do we just give a general timeline for what we're considering on this? I mean, there wasn't any timeline included with the package as far as I saw it.
Nope. Yeah, I think, you know, like so the purpose of the RFQ is to be a little bit more high level at this point than like you know, here's who we'd contract with and here's our timeline for building this out. I mean, I think at a high level, if you're like, this would take 5 years, that's helpful information versus like, we can have these things up and running in 6 months. But we don't need a detailed timeline yet.
Okay.
Good. Okay.
But I do think I think you're thinking about things the right way, and that you know, if something is going to take a few years to develop, some of these funding sources that are time restricted may not be good options to support this. And so that is helpful information for folks to know. But hopefully, yeah, I'll leave it at that.
I can ask another tough
Go for
question,
it.
Chris. So, if a particular property listed as tier 1 were to become the subject of a legal complaint made to the city or to the county or whomever, who would incur the cost of that responding to that legal liability issue?
I don't know if I'm gonna have a good answer for you, but I'm gonna ask for more information anyways. Like, are you, so is this, for instance, like, I'll use you as an example, Chuck. Chuck buys or, you know, gets a piece of property, starts running a shelter on it through this process, and then come to find out, like, Chuck didn't get approval through the city of Bend to site and operate a shelter, and so Chuck gets sued. Is that for
No.
instance? No.
No.
Okay.
No, let's say I own a piece of property and I'm a business,
Okay.
and there's a property made available through CHRO, COIC, the city of Bend, for example, and I object to placement of whatever type of structure you're going to put there, whether it's going to be a whatever shelter, but let's say an outdoor shelter. And because I believe it's going to hurt my business and look bad, and so I retain a lawyer, and I expect that in going forward in this process, that I'm going to have that lawyer engaged in some kind of action against whether it's COIC or CHRO.
Yeah, the property owner. Yeah.
And so we are service providers, or we are nonprofits interested in seeing that that available property used, and there's this threat lingering
Mm-hmm.
that there's a lawyer that's already been hired out there by the property owner. What happens in that circumstance?
Yeah.
Incurring any liability?
I understand what you're asking now. I am not a lawyer, so I can't give legal advice. I would expect that in your scenario, that if a private citizen decided to sue a property owner for using a piece of property in a way they didn't like, I expect that the property owner and the person with the complaint would probably solve that on their own. I'm not trying to give legal advice, but I mean, I think if somebody sued, so just a couple points of clarification. So like, there's no COIC property or no CHRO property. The CHRO doesn't have any property. And there's no COIC property on this list. And so ultimately, the CHRO or COIC at this point are not intending to enter into any agreements with anyone. We're facilitating the process. COIC maybe could, but the CHRO, I would be shocked.
Yeah.
So in that, I would think that like the entity that owns the land would be the one responsible for fighting the lawsuit about the use. So it'd likely be like City of Bend, City of Redmond, or Deschutes County.
But what if the attorney representing the property owner who's not happy with this
Yeah.
names the nonprofit as a party as well? Are those legal expenses going to be covered by the city or whomever, or is it going to be a burden on the nonprofit to have to cover that cost.
That's not something that we've talked about, and so I don't want to make commitments on behalf of the entity. I can't make a commitment right now for how that would work, but I think it's a really good question and something we should be aware of. And I can I can follow up and ask, and I can try to get an answer to you by tomorrow. I also don't know. I mean, in this, do you need to know by a certain amount of time? Like, would if say a city weren't willing to cover legal costs for a nonprofit entity, is that like a non-starter for you?
Well, I can't
Yes.
speak. Okay.
Perfect. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So-
that's a great
Yeah.
question.
So wearing two hats here today, both on the board of Oasis Village and Central Oregon Villages. I mean, it seems like, maybe an extra paragraph or two in a proposal could raise some of these questions. I mean, because we may not, I mean, I'm not sure how we'd get an answer on that one in time, but just say that, this is a concern that we have with moving forward with this property, or what? Is that legit?
Was that a question for me? Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, is it legit to add a paragraph with, these are a couple concerns we have about moving forward with this that would have to be answered in the next phase. I'm thinking of things like, wanting to get fees waived, having a question about, who covers the cost of litigation in the case Chuck was talking about.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, I think and I mean, I don't think that adding a couple things to the RFQ at this point is going to make I mean, definitely push back if you feel like I'm wrong, but I don't know if adding a paragraph to an addendum at this point, just saying these are the things, I don't know. I don't know about that approach, but I do I think I hear what you guys are saying. I completely hear that you don't want to just take on a bunch of risk. You don't want to, sign up to offer a program at a property, not even get to offer it, and then get sued and have a bunch of potential damages. I totally understand that that's a huge risk. I can tell you at a high level that public agency partners are committed to making this work. And if there is, something along the line, I'm not going to make a commitment that they're going to cover all your legal fees just yet without asking them. But I hear your concern. I think it's a reasonable one, and I don't expect that public agencies are just going to throw you to the wolves. So I can't give any more clear instruction on that right now because I just need to go back and ask. But I do think that part of this will be sussed out in the next phase as we get into negotiations about project type. I think right now, if I go to leadership and say, sorry to pick on you, Chuck, but Chuck wants all, legal protection of the county for this project that he hasn't even told us what he wants to develop yet. I think that's going to be tough for me to get a yes or a no. I think that as we start to get more clarity on, it's not like we're buying everybody in an RV and just sending them on their way. Sorry, that was a terrible example, but it's not this big scary project that everyone in the community is afraid of. It's actually, this thing, and here's the rational reason why they would need some legal protection. I think will be more well received than a blanket statement at this point. I will still ask and see what I can get for you now, but I just think we're a little early in the process.
Yeah.
Is that helpful?
Yeah, and again, I think again, it's stuff that would be ironed out one way or the other in that second phase.
Totally.
There's another question I've got. I'm sorry to be the one asking a lot of these questions, but
You're all good.
the community engagement piece in the RFP pushes that onto the nonprofit or whoever is going to be submitting, going forward with the project. And I guess my question concerns what level of engagement would there be with the CHRO or COIC, initiating community engagement, particularly with regard to properties that might be, people might not look forward to having an outdoor camp
Yep.
set up on that site. I guess I'm concerned that if with regard to this one property I'm concerned about, that if the city or the county or whomever kicks the can down the road and say, oh, that community engagement, that's the responsibility of the nonprofit. When so we get blamed, as it were, but
Yes.
but it's the jurisdictions that have put these properties on the list to make them available, and so as a part of, would there be any sort of a roadshow effort, as has been discussed by the CHRO beforehand, to go out and say, hey, these are the lists of eligible properties, and they have our support, and we're willing to support the community engagement that any proposer might come forward with. What level of involvement can we expect from the higher level folks, the Tammy Bainey's or the Keplers or the whomever?
Yep. So I can't speak exactly to like how much the, leadership would be involved. Like I can't commit Tammy to something just quite yet. But what I will say is like we are not intending on the applicants to do all of the public engagement. We are looking for a commitment to partnership on this. Given like what you had said, Chuck, right? So we want to avoid, like we've all seen it happen numerous times. There's a great idea. It doesn't get communicated to the public like in an effective way. And so there's all this pushback, or maybe it does, and there's still all this pushback. But what we're looking for is an opportunity for public agencies to partner with providers so that they can support each other in the process, not so that it's like, just for example, so it's not so that like the city of Redmond has to answer for what maybe Oasis Village is doing or vice versa. We're really looking for a commitment early on to working together on public engagement. And I like a lot of this procurement, was kind of based off the City of Bend's process for Central Oregon villages. I don't know if it feels the same, but we use some of the, RFQ and the RFP language there. And so what, like I worked very closely with Amy Fraley on this, and Amy had said that the City of Bend's experience was that starting early in public communication and being consistent and showing partnership resulted in better outcomes than past attempts to cite new programs. And so that is the approach that we're taking with this solicitation at this time, is encouraging public participation, transparency early in the process. That's why we've, approved all of these different, like every attachment on here, except for I think attachment A, which is the scope of services, has all gone before the CHRO board, has like all been public for months and months. And that's part of the effort to make sure that we're talking about this for a long time in a public way, so that folks don't feel like we're coming in at the last minute and trying to jam, a development that they may not want in their backyard. So to answer your question, Chuck, it's not an explicit burden just on the provider. We're really looking for experience doing public engagement and a commitment to partnering with public agencies on outreach. And exactly how we do that, we're willing to work with you on that. So like, I think roadshows are definitely an opportunity. You've heard the CHRO talk about it. It's on our agenda to talk about again on Thursday. So more of that public engagement piece, but also like if you want us to host a town hall or host some community events near your proposed site or something like that, we're happy to work with you on as the CHRO, and then also the individual entities that would end up signing this commitment with you have also expressed support for public engagement along the way. So huge, big emphasis on transparency and bringing the community along with us. And it is not your sole responsibility. We want to work with you and support you, but we do want your support too.
You want me to ask another one?
Go for it.
I have,
Okay, on the evaluation criteria.
Yep.
It's broken down into, well, it divides up the three categories there.
Yep.
Would a proposer be counted off points for proposing a project on a tier 2 property as opposed to a tier 1?
That's a fantastic question. It does not say. It does not explicitly say on the evaluation criteria whether or not a tier 1 or tier 2, like how those would be scored. I will say that there is a preference for utilizing the public properties that are identified as tier 1 versus the others, but there are not. There's not an explicit point preference on the types of properties that have been proposed. So as of right now, you could get the same amount of points for a project on public or private land. I will say that the tier 1 and tier 2 is really based on like the information that went into making that decision was like really from like a feasibility perspective. And so I wouldn't say that, you know, just suggesting developing a piece of property that a public partner didn't identify wouldn't at the outright get you fewer points. I would assume that given the site characteristics that make it not ideal, that something about the proposal on that property might make it a little bit less competitive. And some examples of that, Chuck, just so I'm not being vague, are like, you know, if there's a flat paved piece of property somewhere that's identified as tier 1, and rather than utilize that property, you propose to use a hilly piece of property that has a bunch of trees on it that need to be cleared and leveled, I would expect that, not because the fact that you submitted, you know, your proposal with the tier 2 property, that you might score a little bit lower, but because your project costs will be higher given the extra work, that might lead to like a lower score. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
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 So yeah, so there is not like a -5 points if somebody doesn't use one of the green properties in the review materials. So to answer your question now.
And I haven't come through the properties as well as Chuck has, but is it fair to assume that the tier 1s, I mean, you said they're selected for feasibility, but are they zoned correctly?
I don't.
Land use and zoning for
Yeah.
an operation.
The properties were identified. So like everything that was submitted, including the tier 1s, those were recommendations from the entities that own the properties themselves. So it wasn't that I went through and said, these are the ones that I like and these are the ones I don't like. So I just wanted to make that clear, that like
Oh, yeah.
the way that they're prioritized. As far as the zoning, I can't say for certain. I'm looking right now at the list, and the information that I include is the tax lot, the address, the description and comments, acreage, and who the owner is. And I do not believe that each of the properties are, I don't think that their zoning is included. I'm looking right now at the list of Oregon properties, and it does not appear that the zoning's included. Let me check some of the others.
Some of the, the county land out by 61st, that was identified as EFU land.
Yep, the City of Bend owned properties that I'm looking at in the Google Drive spreadsheet. So here I can show you all how I got there, just so I'm not, just so I'm clear. So I'm on the main. I've gone from the solicitation to the Teams link, and then I've clicked the individual properties here. And if you open up the City of Bend ones, you'll see zoning in column D. But for the state of Oregon properties, you will notice no zoning. For the Redmond properties, it's just a list, and the county properties, let's see. It does have the zoning as well. So the City of Bend and Deschutes County properties have zoning, state of Oregon does not.
So
And
then my
Redmond,
next question
go
is,
ahead.
if the county land is zoned as EFU, but the county's saying that it could be used for this project, does that mean that the county is going to go through the steps to get an exception for those properties?
I think it's a conversation to be had. These properties came from the county property manager, Christy Bollinger, and Eric Kropp in the admin department. And I cannot say right now whether or not the planning department has had a chance to review any of this. And so no, I don't think that the county, by offering up these properties, is making the commitment that they're going to go, request a conditional use permit on your behalf. I do think that it's, again, it's like an opportunity for conversation for some of those like non-monetary, non-tangible benefits. But at this point, I don't think that an indication that a piece of property is included on this is an indication that the county is like indicating that it can absolutely be changed. I understand that that's vague and maybe not helpful.
Yeah, I mean, the price point changes significantly if the nonprofit needs to do that themselves.
I think it's definitely worth having a conversation about, Nikki, but it's not something I can make a commitment on right now.
Is that something that you could bring up in the Thursday meeting if this is discussed?
So, great question. The CHRO board itself is not like making the decisions. They're making some of the decisions that go into this, but ultimately, I think that would have to come from, like, because these are properties that are owned by one entity and not owned by the CHRO board, it would have to go back to Deschutes County to find out whether or not they'd be willing to do that. Like, it's not like the CHRO doesn't have control over the county, and so we couldn't make them do this. I think it would be more appropriate to go back to like the Board of County Commissioners or admin and see what kind of the planning department thinks. But I don't want to assume for them. I can definitely ask. I can make that a question that I follow up on. I'm expecting that the county is going to say, like nothing is a right? Like I think you're likely going to have to apply, but I can definitely follow up. Just to make sure that I am capturing your question correctly. So we're looking at, if properties zoned EFU, for example, if the county would support going after a zoning change.
Yeah. I
Okay.
mean, we know that within city limits, we have protections or amendments that allow us to do this within city limits, but there's nothing right now that's for county, whether it's ODOT or county lands. If it's zoned for something other than what we need, then it's a no-go for the property.
Gotcha. And just so I'm understanding what you're saying correctly, Nikki, and thank you for bringing this up. So are you saying that the city of Bend and Redmond, or maybe just the city of Bend, like they have a policy now that if a property is zoned for something that makes your development not an eligible use, that they'll go do that on your behalf.
Well, House Bill
Well,
2006 gave the city
Yeah.
the leverage to say we'll override this for this. We'll override the city coding requirements for this type of development.
Gotcha.
And that doesn't exist in the county properties.
Gotcha. That is a fantastic question, and one I can ask county folks and get posted to the open procurement page as soon as I possibly can. That's a great question.
Chris,
Thanks.
could I ask you to look at a particular property?
You can ask me to look at it, but I can't promise I can give you information about it.
Well, I'm looking at Exhibit B, and on page 16 at
Okay.
the top, there's a property identified as 64295 North Highway 97. And I was looking on to see what that was zoned, but I don't see it.
There's two, it looks like
Right,
the
right.
200 acre one. You're looking at both.
The 200 acre one, yeah,
Let me see here.
or both actually. That's if they're
I don't know. It looks like it's these two, I believe. Oh wait, no, that's not the same
no,
acreage. No, it's
nope, nope,
these
nope.
two.
It's the one listed and then highlighted in yellow, the 106 acre site.
Well, that one says 106 acres, but when I look back, it set the from columns 10 to 14, you see highlighted, it looks like there's an 80 acre property and a 200 acre property. Those match. Oh wait, 238.8. I see what you're saying.
No, but actually it's the
Oh,
it's the 106 acre site. Is that still on the open list? Or on the eligible list? Thought it was.
it is. Yeah.
Okay.
It's
I
up
was on the
here.
wrong page. I was on the wrong page then.
Gotcha.
So that site is currently, that's the site at Juniper Ridge where people are camping right now. And services are being provided there. And so I was wondering what the zoning was, if a provider submitting a proposal for something on that site, is it zoned EFU or what is it zoned?
It looks like that 106.74 acre property, if that's the one you're referring to, it says open space and conservation and landscape management combining zone. And you can find all of the zoning for these, near 64295 Highway 97 on the Deschutes County properties on the second tab. Deschutes County owned within 5 miles of the UGB.
Well, I guess I'm unfamiliar with whether under the current county zoning provisions, a managed camp can be placed on property that's zoned open space and conservation or landscape management.
Great. So yeah, it might be helpful, like it's not that every property on this list is it the methodology for how these lists came to be from each entity is maybe a little bit different. And I think it's important for the Deschutes County properties that to my knowledge, there were no properties that were just like taken on or off. This is like Christy Bollinger and Eric Kropp's master list of, maybe vacant, maybe partially vacant, like county owned property. This is everything. So they didn't go through with a fine tooth comb and say, oh, well, we want to reserve this property for that, or we don't like this property for this option anymore. So this is just all the properties that the county owns, I believe, that are vacant. That may not be the case for all of the other properties, like references made earlier in this call about like the changes in the City of N property. I can't speak to why those properties were removed, but I can say that there haven't been any changes to this. And I think that the state of Oregon took a similar approach where, like some of those properties aren't even in Deschutes County. But they, ran their system query, put Central Oregon in there or whatever, and that's what it popped out.
I guess what I'm getting at is if the property is already being utilized for people camping on it, if a nonprofit were to come in and submit a proposal to let's formalize that. Since people are there already, let's create a program there that would allow these people to remain, but take it up one level in terms of management and organization and whatnot. Is the county going to come back and say, "Oh no, you can't do that. That's zoned the wrong way," even though people are already living there?
I would encourage you to think outside the box. I don't think that just because the zoning doesn't allow for a certain use currently, that it's not subject to change. I just want to, I don't want to make a commitment where a commitment doesn't exist, right? And so it is definitely possible that we could go for some form of zone change to have, to allow for a use that you'd propose. I just can't make a commitment that like Deschutes County will absolutely do this, if that makes sense. I think it's a fantastic suggestion, and that is the type of thing that we're looking for. So
Okay.
you're on the right track. Thank you. Any other questions?
Uh,
Can
Yeah,
you
Leslie, go
refresh?
ahead.
Oh, thanks. Can you refresh my memory? When is the RFP expected to be due?
That is a great question. On the solicitation, we currently have the timeline on page 2. I'll share that. You'll see that we have anticipated dates, just given the fact that, originally we had talked about announcing this RFQ, I think a month before it actually ended up coming out. So just being really explicit that these are anticipated dates. But we're looking for, responses to the RFQ due, I believe, next Friday, the 26th. Is that next Friday? No, it's next Tuesday.
that's-
A week from today. It's a week from today. And we're hoping to take just about a week to review everything that came in and let folks know kind of what next steps are going to look like. We're hoping that we would get a procurement out like the second week of April, and then would move that process forward hopefully by the end of the month. I think that I just want to emphasize all those dates are very much in the anticipation phase right now and not firm. And I know you're probably sick of me saying this, but it depends a little bit on what comes from this process, right? Like if it's entirely possible that you all have listened to me talk for an hour and are so soured from this procurement that none of you want to submit anything. And, given that, we would have to put this we'd have to, work internally and put out another solicitation. So it does depend a little bit on what comes in, what the next process looks like. But we are hoping to get the funding. Like we'd really like to finalize this before the start of summer so that folks can actually get started while the weather's good, before things get nasty again in the fall, is really the goal. But it's a little bit up in the air right now.
Thank you.
You bet.
That's another question. I guess a final question I have is, does this list of eligible properties die with this RFP process, or does this continue ad infinitum? Like if for some reason in 2025, there's a nonprofit that comes along and says, "Oh, wow, we've got a great idea for this particular property here. Is somebody gonna come back and say, oh, no, that was way back when, that's out of the picture now? No, can't do that.
That's a great question, Chuck, and I'm probably going to give you another unsatisfying answer. So like the CHRO doesn't own any of these, right? So we don't have control over the other entities. So I would say, like, my personal perspective is that it would make sense as a provider in the future to say, hey, a couple of years ago, you guys had identified that this was a property that you were interested in utilizing for, a new program or an expanded program to serve folks experiencing homelessness. That being said, like, you've seen the property list change in just a few short months. And so I think that, entities that own these properties are going to continue to do what they will with them throughout this process. So I don't want you to think that this is like, set in stone and forever this is going to be the list of properties. But I do think unsolicited advice, it would be a rational approach to say, in the past you had said that you had identified these properties to potentially offer this service. Would you still be willing to do that? I think is a reasonable approach. But the CHRO doesn't have like the power to require that, entities maintain these properties as vacant until they could be developed. So it's not, no, this list will not be set in stone forever. I hope that makes sense.
It does. I mean, the status of those properties is going to change for
Yeah.
some of them anyway.
Yeah. I think your head's in the right place. Like, I think it makes sense to, if an entity has said that I thought that this was great for, a safe parking program 2 years ago, then explain what's changed in those 2 years that makes it not. But it's not a commitment.
So just to clarify, the fact that these properties are listed really just means that they're vacant, but not that have they been vetted for any other criteria?
They have been vetted, and like you'll see in the list of properties, like there are detailed notes for each property. They talk about the site characteristics, they talk about proximity to certain things, they talk about slope, what necessary improvements would be needed. So it's not that it's like a completely unvetted list of properties, but you are correct in that for some entities that submitted these properties, it was just like, here's our list of vacant properties. Like, I think, the state of Oregon one specifically, I don't remember if it was included on this list or if it was initially submitted and then we went through and maybe removed a few. But like, I think originally on, that it was like the top of Pilot Butte was listed as a vacant property. And like, sure, it's vacant. We're not at all suggesting that we would, cite a
Right.
program or something on top of Pilot Butte. So but like those tier 1 properties absolutely have been vetted. That is like specific for this work. Folks have gone in and said, we think that these are ideal properties. So it's not that those are their like, this is our tier 1 general ODOT property. Those are specific to this work.
It's somewhat disingenuous, though. I mean, what if Central Oregon Villages came in and submitted a proposal to put in safe parking at the Franklin shelter or at the side of the at the side of the Second Street shelter by Mart, where there's an existing shelter operated by Shepherd's House? I mean, come on, that's
Well, I mean, I understand where you're coming from, Chuck, but to push back a little bit, it is completely possible that that Shepherd's House says, hey, we want to expand safe parking at one of our already occupied sites. And that, I know it would be weird, but it's a possibility. So I hear what you're saying, and I understand your frustrations, but I do think that we are looking to hear from providers like what they think will work and where, and are not trying to be too prescriptive on the types of locations. Like there isn't like a wonderful perfect spot in the city of Bend that everyone agrees is just like the next place for X, right? And so I think this is just casting a wide net approach and seeing what's an opportunity. I totally get your concerns, but I think on the flip side, we wanted to avoid the like, oh, well, you have these properties that are vacant. Why wouldn't you offer up or consider those? So I think we can all agree that there are some properties in here that are not well suited to this type of program, but we didn't want to go through and say, oh yeah, you know, there are, how many are there? You know, maybe not thousands, hundreds of vacant publicly owned properties, but we're only going to give you a list of the 10 that we really are interested in. Like we are willing to consider outside the box options. Just kind of trying to direct folks where we think their efforts might be the most fruitful, if that makes sense.
Sorry to give you a hard time.
No. I'm here for it. Like I'm happy to have pushback.
I'm just wondering if, and I'm not really that familiar with what Chuck is looking at and what his thinking is, but it sounds like there's a concept. Would outlining that concept, and then, I mean, it may be there's more than one property it would work on,
Yeah,
so
that's
I mean,
a fantastic idea.
It's like, you know, this is what we're looking at overall. These are the places we see it potentially working, like that.
Yeah, you could absolutely submit a proposal that says like, hi, I'm, you know, Chris Ogren Outdoor Shelters Inc. And I'm just giving an example, and I have this beautiful idea for a safe parking program, and I need, you know, a half acre of paved space. It needs to be near this or away from this. Here are some properties that I think might work. I think that is totally is something you could submit. And you can also submit multiple things too. Like if you want to say, here's an idea for a safe parking program. If you don't like that, I'm unwilling to budge, but here's an idea for a tiny home village instead, or something like that. I don't want you to spend, you know, 60 hours coming up with every possible different iteration, but this is a thinking outside the box kind of opportunity.
Okay, good.
I have just kind of one follow-up question is some of our questions I know need to be answered by planning departments and attorneys, whether it's city or county. Would some of these questions be moved through to those departments prior to the RFP? Because I think some of our holdup at Central Oregon Villages was the questions weren't asked or answered until we got into the middle of it, and it did slow it down. So wondering if those types of questions can be answered in between these few weeks between the RFQ and the RFP, so that we would have a better foundation to build out the RFP.
I think that's a great question, Nikki. And I really appreciate the, you know, hey, Chris, I've been doing this for a long time, and this is how it worked in the past. I think I want to encourage you to include any questions like in your submission, even if it's just like, here's a list of questions that we would need answers to before we would feel comfortable moving forward, or like, here are big areas of opportunity or big hurdles that we'd have to overcome. I think it's really helpful if you call those questions out earlier in the process. I don't want to make a commitment that just because it's not in the procurement, like I'm supposed to stick to what's in the procurement today. And so I can't make a commitment on when we would respond yet at this time. But if you ask them, I will make sure that they get to the right people, and everyone will be aware of what your questions are and the implications. I just can't make a commitment on like quite when we would respond yet.
Oh, sure. And I didn't mean to make it sound like, oh, we've done this already.
No. You
We done
have
it
done
one
this.
time.
You have done this before. So no, like this is very, like this is really helpful. I don't want you to feel like, no, very well received. I appreciate the feedback. Like it's really important for us to know what the sticking points are so that we're going into this eyes wide open too, and we don't get through an RFP process and, you know, my bosses start asking me, well, what's going on, Chris? And it's like, oh, well, we had all these zoning questions that we couldn't answer until way after. So totally appropriate to ask. Just because I'm not able to give you a clear response doesn't mean it's an inappropriate question. I will I would encourage you to include some of those things in your solicitation, and if you have any others, I'll make sure they get to people. And
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if it's the same question or the related question, but it seems to me once, if, some providers are selected to move forward to the next process, it seems like there needs to be more time between that RFP
Yeah.
and that step. So there's time to answer questions because, there
I
the things you
agree.
learn, it's like getting an electrical line can take months.
Yep.
Getting the permit approved, and so
Yep.
I think there in that prior to the RFP is when I'd like to be talking to the city about those things as
Yep.
opposed to after we've done it. And then we're, trying to figure out who's going to be responsible for what.
Okay. That is really helpful feedback. And so just so I make sure I'm capturing this, are you saying more time before the RFP process starts so that we can like answer some questions is what you're asking for, or more time between RFP opening and RFP deadline?
Well, I assume it could go either way, but I'm thinking that, it's like, okay, you've identified us for potentially doing X
Mm-hmm.
project.
Yep.
Okay, what we'd like to do now is sit down and talk about, what's involved in that process so
Yeah.
that when the RFP comes up, we're not stuck going back and trying to get an answer from the building department
Totally.
or, a budget from someone else at the last minute to try to figure out these things. So I don't know
Yep.
where that time comes in, but in the negotiation process somewhere.
Gotcha. Okay, that's really helpful. So I'm just gonna put more time for applicant and contracting entity to like negotiate a little bit.
Well, yeah, I would say before the proposed budget would be due, because
Yes.
those
Yeah.
questions inform the budget.
Yep, totally. That makes sense.
Hmm.
I mean, if you don't have to pay $12,000 in a permit fee because the CDCs are going to be waived, or
Yep.
if you
Or
have to
wait
hire
6
a
months to find out. Totally.
Yep.
yeah, or hiring a land use attorney, that's going to be
Yep.
$100,000 to try to
Yep.
get zoning changed.
Yeah. That totally makes sense. Okay. That really makes sense. I will convey that.
I think another thing is kind of driving the train is that the restrictions on use of administrative funds. And right now, the issue is being able to pay for staffing to manage these facilities. And if there are restrictions from the city or from the county on that, that that kind of ties the hands of the nonprofit. Nikki can speak to this more, but that's that's a project killer, as it were. We need more openness and ability to use the funds freely, as we would need to be able to, without saying, oh well, you're limited to 15% overhead for administrative costs, and that salary's got to come out of overhead, and so you've got to come up with the funds for that yourself. I don't know if Nikki wants to comment on what she's having to go through right now.
I mean, I can just say like at a high level, working with, HUD programs and stuff, I'm very aware of the like frustrations with the limited ability to use administrative funding, just, kind of across the board. Like, I think we're celebrating, or I think
Mm.
COIC is celebrating right now that they're finally able to use 5% of
Mhm.
the full annual award to support the planning grant. So I hear you, 1,000,000%, Chuck. I can't speak to, at this point, I can't speak to what kind of restrictions that an entity would, like, we don't even have a full clear number of what the total budget is. So I don't think I can get into specifics on like allowable versus not allowable costs right now. I don't think we're there, but I do hear you 1,000,000% on, we can't just have this be something where we say we need a new shelter up and we don't have any money for staffing or any money to support recurring things. Like, we know from a staff perspective that one-time funding to prop up something that's supposed to exist for longer than one time is just not a recipe for success. And so I will definitely be advocating for that on everyone's behalf, that we don't be too prescriptive with how funding can be used, that we back providers into a corner where they're not able to offer the service that they suggested that they would offer. So
Yeah, and
Yeah.
one other, I'm sorry, go ahead, Nikki.
I was just gonna say I mean, especially in initial phases of an RFQ, an RFP, and setting up the new program, you have zero program
yeah,
staff, and it's all administrative. And
yeah.
so the PR, the HR, all of it, it's just 100% administrative.
Well,
And
and
then
we,
the backup of it is when you want the grant reports or the contracting and the invoicing.
yeah.
Again, it's tremendously time intensive, and it's all administrative.
Yep. And even more so, like, piggybacking off what you just said, like you guys referenced earlier, that robust public engagement is something that CHRO entities want. And so it would be, we'd be shooting ourselves in the foot if we asked for, that kind of support and then didn't provide funding that could support it. So I absolutely hear you. Staffing support is important, and we need to be able to think about the administrative costs to set a program up, the reporting requirements that we're imposing, and how all that's going to get paid for. So I'm sensitive to that, and I absolutely hear you.
Yeah, and one more thing on timing of things, if it's possible to like look around and see what other deadlines people are facing at the moment. For instance, we had a CDBG grant due last week. We're working on this week. We've got the MAC group is asking for us for information and asking
Gotcha.
for us to be more participatory. There's a I don't know, community health resources grant
Yeah.
that's out there with the deadline coming up that I'm going to be talking to a consultant to help us out with on that tomorrow. But it's, for a small group, for a small nonprofit, when these things stack up and they're all like things that are very potentially useful and that we can make good use of, but when they start stacking up, you just get to the point
Can't
where
do
you're
it.
either not
Yeah.
doing the job you're supposed to be doing, or you're not applying for some things you should apply for.
Yeah. I hear you. And yes, I mean, I did my best to try
No,
to get this out in a time that wasn't too crazy, but I am also super sympathetic to that. Especially, like, I know that I have some grants coming up like this summer through the COC and stuff like that. And I know that I personally don't want to be facilitating like multiple different solicitations at the same
right.
time. So yes, I hear you. I guess just putting it back on you a little bit, like,
Mhm.
I'm trying to not work in a silo, but
Yep.
but it is just like, it's hard to keep track of, like, like, I don't work on CDBG, I don't work on like when the the City of Bend's AHAC gives out grants, like, I'm not involved in that. And so I'm not always aware, but if you have suggestions or recommendations on like, this is a no-go time for us, like, don't you dare put it out then, or like, hey, things are really good if you want to try to shoot for this, or and
Yep.
we'll just make the commitment to kind of, as we had, trying to communicate early through the CHRO a little bit of what our expectations are and intentions so that you guys are kind of aware of what's coming down the pipeline. I know that we don't have like a great way of getting information out to the community right now besides our public meetings, but be aware that the CHRO board is incredibly interested in this, and I've been talking about it every month for months. And so it's a good place to look and listen for, you know, updates on how this process is moving.
And just Chris, just personally, and I think the other people here would agree, we think you're doing a great job, and we
Yes.
recognize that you are stuck
you.
in the middle and either getting squished or pulled,
Yeah.
whatever the right metaphor is, you know, from all sides. So we appreciate the time and your willingness to answer questions and get us answers.
Thank you so much,
Yeah.
James. Yeah. And I could not, you know, thank you, all of you. You know, I would not be successful in this work without the hard work that you guys do every day. And so I just wanted to say right back at you, like, you're the inspiration that keeps me going, and the people that keep me in the work. So, thank you all for your time. I know we're way over. I'm going to post the recording to this on the open procurements page. It might be up tonight. It might be up later tomorrow. Remember that tomorrow's the deadline for questions. So Chuck, if you have any other ones that come up, make sure you get them in. And otherwise, best of luck and thank you for your interest. And I'm sure we'll be in touch soon.
Thank you.
Awesome.
Thank you,
Thank you all.
Chris.
You bet.
Good
Bye-bye.
to meet you.
Great to meet you too.